Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. North Korea has fired more than 200 rounds of artillery shells towards South Korea's Yeonpyeong Island, prompting evacuation orders. Terming this incident as a provocative act, Seoul has cautioned that the act threatens peace on the Korean peninsula and has also raised tensions. Pyongyang, though, has denied that the islands are in danger from its firing drills. The incident isn't without a precedent, though. Back in 2010, North Korean artillery, in response to the South Korean live-fire drills, had fired scores of times on Yeonpyeong Island, resulting in the deaths of 4 people, 2 soldiers and 2 civilians. It was the first attack on a civilian area since the 1950-53 Korean War. Pyongyang has repeatedly proclaimed that it is actually ramping up its military arsenal in preparation for a war that could break out any time on the Korean peninsula. Our next report gets more.
A North Korean artillery barrage near 2 South Korean islands, Yeonpyeong and Baeongyang, on the 5th of January escalated tensions in the Korean peninsula. The 2 sparsely populated islands are situated just south of a de facto maritime border between the 2 Koreas. Residents of the 2 islands were ordered to evacuate by Seoul to shelters as a preventative measure, and ferries were suspended. In retaliation to the North Korean shelling, Seoul conducted live-fire military drills near the 2 islands. This is one of the most serious military escalations on the Korean peninsula since Pyongyang fired shells at one of the islands in 2010.
On the 5th, North Korea fired more than 200 rounds from around 9 am to 11 am in the areas of Jangsangot in the northern part of Baeongyang Island and Deongsangot in the northern areas of Yeonpyeong Island. There's no damage to our people or military, and the point of impact is the northern area of the northern limit line.
The North Korean military termed the naval live-fire drill a natural countermeasure against South Korean threats. The shells landed in a buffer zone created under a 2018 tension-reducing deal, which itself fell apart last November after the launch of a spy satellite by Pyongyang. Seoul termed the resumption of artillery fire in the buffer zone a provocative act.
This is a provocative act that threatens the peace on the Korean peninsula and increases tensions by resuming artillery fire within the West Sea buffer zone, after North Korea unilaterally insisted on breaking the September 19 military agreement on November 23, 2023.
China, which is Pyongyang's benefactor and a major ally, called for restraint, whereas the United States urged North Korea to end its destabilizing actions and return to diplomatic talks. Relations between the 2 Koreas are at one of their lowest points in decades, after North Korea's status as a nuclear power was enshrined into the constitution by its leader Kim Jong-un. Caught in the crossfire, residents of these islands fervently hope that this recent escalation doesn't spiral out of control and the 2 Koreas resume their military confidence-building talks.
The new year has begun with a sharp escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war. At a time when Kiev is desperately lobbying at Western capitals for more funds to fight the war, Vladimir Putin, it appears, is preparing for a knockout punch of sorts to force Ukraine to the negotiating table on Russian terms. The fate of the Ukraine war that has now dragged on for almost about 2 years could now be decided in the next few weeks and months to come. But the big question is this: will Joe Biden continue to fund Ukraine's war effort, or will the United States silently let Ukraine sink?
While the rest of the world rang in the new year with hope and festivities, this is what the Ukrainian skies have looked like in the first week of 2024. Wave after wave of Russian missiles and drone strikes over several Ukrainian cities targeting Ukraine's power infrastructure. In Kiev's Vyshehirski district, gas pipelines were damaged and electricity and water supplies have been cut. A total of 39 Ukrainians have been killed in this New Year airstrikes by Russia. Irina Nikitina was celebrating the New Year with her family when a Russian strike near her residential apartment forced everyone out on the streets in the bitter cold.
This is our New Year. What a present they made for us this New Year. They are black souls, simply black souls. They bomb residential areas. There are people here. How can one do such a thing?
In Kiev, several brand new cars were burnt to shells and car dealerships destroyed as they took a direct hit from a Russian missile. The explosion blew out the windows of several buildings. The fear now is Moscow will repeat what it did last year. Bomb Ukraine's power infrastructure to plunge millions of Ukrainians into darkness during peak winter.
Since the beginning of today, there have been almost 100 missiles of various types, and the trajectories have been especially calculated by the enemy to cause as much damage as possible. This is absolutely conscious terror. In just a few days, these last days from December 29 till today, Russia has already used almost 300 missiles and more than 200 drones against Ukraine. No other country so far has repelled similar attacks by combined drones and missiles, including aeroballistic ones. Today alone, 10 Kinzhal missiles were shot down.
Ukraine too has managed to strike inside the Russian territory. This dashcam footage shows the moment when Ukraine struck the Russian provincial city of Belgorod. At least 20 people were killed and over 100 others were injured. Vladimir Putin condemned the strike on Belgorod as a terror attack and insisted that Russia will end this war on its terms.
We too want the end of this conflict as quickly as possible, only on our terms. We have no desire to fight indefinitely, but we are not going to give up our positions either. You have fought, been wounded there and so on. So are we going to give up everything? We are being filmed now, but otherwise I would show them a hand gesture. You all know what kind of gesture, so it's not going to happen.
Ukraine is now staring at an uncertain future. Western military aid is drying up, and Russia has turned on the temperature in the battlefield. Military experts now say Moscow is sensing its opportunity to deliver a knockout blow in this war. At a time when the Western leaders seem to have lost their political will to back Kyiv in this fight.
China has built the biggest navy in the world. Now, starting from 2015, China has embarked on what is being described as a shipbuilding spree, unlike anything that has been witnessed in the history of the world. According to an assessment by the US Department of Defense, China at this moment has an estimated 350 major combat vessels and submarines. In comparison, the United States is estimated to have about 290 ships. But what has rung some serious alarm bells is the fact that the Chinese Navy isn't just getting bigger, it is even getting better. And this week, China for the very first time has showed off to the world its Fujian aircraft carrier's advanced catapult launch system. Now, Fujian's catapults are powered by electromagnets that allow fighter jets to be launched more frequently and with more weapons and ammunitions. The only other nation with such naval capabilities is the United States of America. So why is China building up its naval forces in this furious manner? China's naval power is undergoing some very dramatic changes. According to the US Defense Department, China's navy is an increasingly modern and a flexible force that is focused on replacing previous generations of platforms with limited capabilities in favor of larger, modern, multi-role combatants. What this means is that the modern Chinese Navy has modern multi-role vessels that feature advanced anti-ship, anti-air and anti-submarine weapons and sensors. China is spending vast amounts of resources in improving its naval power. China's growing fleet of aircraft carriers has garnered a lot of attention. As of today, China has 2 combat-ready aircraft carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong, while a 3rd aircraft carrier, Fujian, is currently being fitted out. It is a Type 003 carrier with a displacement of 85,000 tons. And this week, this entirely domestically designed and built aircraft carrier was showcased on Chinese state media as part of China's military response to President Xi Jinping's call for national rejuvenation, a term that refers to unifying mainland China with Taiwan.
We have always kept in mind the chairman's great trust and devoted ourselves to the aircraft carrier cause and steadily promoted the mooring test as planned. In the new year, we will seize every day and work tenaciously to form combat effectiveness as soon as possible and move forward to achieve the 100-year goal of the founding of the army as scheduled.
At the heart of this furious naval expansion by the Chinese is an impending battle for Taiwan. By 2035, China is expected to possess a minimum of 6 aircraft carriers. A carrier fleet can also provide air cover for an amphibious invasion of Taiwan. It can even confront the US Navy in the very first carrier versus carrier battles that have been witnessed since the end of the Second World War. By 2027, China is expected to field as many as about 400 combat vessels, while the US Navy's goal is to have 355 combat vessels with no fixed date to reach this target. But the number game can sometimes be misleading. The US Navy still deploys more tonnage on the high seas. It has bigger and heavier armed ships like guided missile destroyers and cruisers. For every 1,000 tons of displacement, an aircraft carrier can carry a fighter jet on its desk. The heavier American ships mean that the United States still has a better advantage in dominating the skies over the blue seas. The 4th Taiwan Strait crisis in August 2022, in which China conducted biggest military drills, were a statement of intent. Beijing made it clear that if it wants, it can blockade Taiwan at a moment of its choosing. With every passing year, China is shifting the balance of power on the high seas. It is no longer content sitting tight in the South China Sea region, but building artificial islands, militarizing them, and expanding its footprint. Aircraft carriers such as the Fujian are being built to overwhelm Taiwan and to keep the United States out of a region that Beijing considers its backyard. The deputy political leader of Hamas, Saleh al-Aruri, was assassinated on the 2nd of January in an allegedly an Israeli drone strike in Beirut in Lebanon. 6 others, 2 Hamas military commanders and 4 other members were also killed in the strike that has been described as a surgical strike on Hamas leadership by an Israeli government advisor. Tel Aviv, for its part, has neither confirmed nor has it denied its role in these killings. Condemning the attack, Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's political bureau leader, has called it a cowardly terrorist act and a clear violation of Lebanon's sovereignty. With the nearly 3-month-long Israel-Hamas war exhibiting no signs of de-escalation, the strike has now fueled widespread regional fears of a bigger conflagration. Our next report gets you the details.
Israel's war against Palestinian militant group Hamas reached Lebanon on Tuesday, when Hamas's deputy political leader Saleh al-Aruri along with 6 others were killed in a drone strike in southern Beirut. The alleged Israeli drone attack targeted a Hamas office in the southern Beirut suburb of Danieh. Danieh is considered a stronghold of allied Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. Firefighters and paramedics were seen gathered around a high-rise building where a large hole was created on the third floor due to the impact. Eyewitnesses narrated horrific scenes of body parts strewn on the ground because of multiple explosions.
At about 5:30, we heard the sound of an explosion. Then another explosion, followed by a third explosion a few seconds later. The smoke was rising heavily. The explosion shook the office of Al-Musharrafia Mukhtar. Because of the size of the explosion, we ran towards it. We saw body parts on the ground, cars on fire, and the flat upstairs that was struck. There were a lot of body parts on the ground following the explosion.
Since the unprecedented October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israel, Tel Aviv, in its war on Hamas, has announced killings of Hamas commanders and officials. But 57-year-old Saleh al-Aruri, who lived in exile, is the most high-profile figure to be killed so far. A veritable number two, he was one of the founders of Hamas's military wing, the Qassam Brigades, which carried out the deadly October 7th assault on Israel. The United States last year had announced a bounty of $5 million for information on him, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed in the past to eliminate Hamas's leaders wherever they might be. The fact that his death was the result of first Israeli strike on the Lebanese capital since hostilities began fueled fears of a wider conflagration. Hamas struck a defiant tone, claiming that Aruri's death will not lead to its defeat.
We confirm the assassination led by the Zionist occupier of our brother and important national leader Sheikh Saleh al-Aruri and his brothers from the movement leaders' entourage on the Lebanese territory is a terrorist act from all aspects and a violation of the Lebanese sovereignty. A movement whose leaders and founders fall as martyrs for the dignity of our people and our nation will never be defeated, God willing, but this kind of targeting will make it stronger and more determinate.
Hezbollah also called the attack a serious assault on Lebanon and a dangerous development in the course of the war. The Israel-Hamas war has also led to almost daily exchanges of fire on the border with Lebanon between Israel's army and the Hezbollah. The assassination of Saleh al-Aruri boiling over into a wider regional conflict is a major cause of concern, and the next few days are undoubtedly fraught with danger.
At least 84 people were killed in southern Iran at the grave of the slain military general Qasem Soleimani on the 3rd of January. The twin suicide blast in which more than 200 other people were wounded targeted hundreds of mourners who had gathered near the burial site of the top Iranian general to commemorate his assassination by the Americans just 4 years ago in a drone strike. The 4th of January was declared a day of national mourning. Now, ISIS has claimed responsibility for the terror attack. Now, early on the day of the blast, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had vowed a harsh response. Now, Wednesday's attack has come amidst heightened tensions in the region, just a day after the deputy leader of Hamas had been killed in an Israeli drone strike in Beirut in Lebanon. Our next report gets you more details.
The Islamic Republic of Iran was jolted on Wednesday by the deadliest militant attack since its 1979 Islamic Revolution. Two explosions in quick succession struck a crowd commemorating slain military general Qasem Soleimani's 4th death anniversary. Reportedly, the first bomb was detonated around 3 p.m. local time, about 700 meters from the Gardens of Martyrs cemetery, around Sahib al-Zaman Mosque in the eastern outskirts of Kerman. Soleimani's hometown and place of burial, Kerman is about 820 kilometers southeast of the capital, Tehran. The second blast took place about 15 minutes later, around 1 kilometer away from the cemetery. this time spraying shrapnel into a screaming crowd fleeing the first bombing. ISIS, which claimed responsibility for the twin blasts, said that 2 suicide bombers detonated their explosive vests, wreaking havoc. Qasem Soleimani, as commander of the Revolutionary Guard's overseas operations arm, the Quds Force, was a key architect of Iranian policy across the region. An immensely popular figure in Iran, he was killed in a US drone strike after touching down at the Baghdad airport on the 3rd of January 2020. The strike was ordered by the then US President Donald Trump, claiming that Soleimani was planning an imminent attack on US military personnel in Iraq. Trump had described Soleimani as the #1 terrorist anywhere in the world. On the day of the blasts, the United States rejected allegations that ally Israel or Washington had any role in the deadly blasts in Iran.
I do want to address some of the irresponsible claims that I have seen circulate and say that, number one, the United States was not involved in any way, and any suggestion to the contrary is ridiculous. And number two, we have no reason to believe that Israel was involved in this explosion.
Escalating the already heightened tensions, the blasts happened a day after Hamas's deputy leader and a veritable #2, Saleh al-Aruri, was killed in a drone strike in Beirut. Last month, an Israeli airstrike outside the Syrian capital Damascus had killed Sayed Razi Mousavi, a senior advisor in Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Israel's war with Hamas, coupled with these twin blasts in Iran and the killing of Saleh al-Aruri, has put the Middle East on edge. All the stakeholders would do well to exercise restraint and not escalate the conflict any further.
And with that is a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.